India is welcoming Chinese investment again. For the past 4 years, this relationship has been in a state of deep freeze. China's aggression at the border forced New Delhi to act, and India responded with tough restrictions on Chinese trade and investment. But now there seems to be a shift. China has a habit of using trade relationships to disregard India's demands for troop withdrawal from the border. Tonight, we're asking the question, is doing business with China still a good idea? Meanwhile, Prime Minister Modi is about to leave Poland for Ukraine. Ahead of his arrival in Kiev, he has voiced support for talks to end the war. We'll also tell you about the special train that will take Prime Minister Modi to Ukraine. Tonight, we're also launching a campaign, #SafetyIsHerRight, where we bring you stories, a series of stories about how women in India still remain unsafe across all spheres of life. And finally, we'll tell you how the incoming Starbucks CEO will be taking a plane to office 3 times a week. Brian Nicole has refused to move from California to Seattle for his new job. That and more coming up. The headlines first. Indonesian protesters clash with the police. They're angry over a bid to revise the election rules. The court barred the outgoing president's youngest son from contesting polls due to his age, but the government wants to supersede that order. As protests rage, lawmakers now say the proposed changes could be put on hold. Bangladesh revokes the diplomatic passport of its former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Earlier this month, Hasina fled to India after a student-led uprising. The former Bangladeshi premier is still in India, but her situation remains uncertain as she pursues asylum. So far, no country has approved her request. Sri Lanka's top court convicts the president for delaying the local election. The polls have been delayed by more than a year, but the judgment carries no immediate legal consequences for Ranil Wickremesinghe. He enjoys immunity while in office. Next month, presidential elections will be held in Sri Lanka. Kenyan police offer cash reward to nab a suspected serial killer. The suspect escaped from a Nairobi prison yesterday. He is accused of murdering and dismembering more than 40 women. This is the second time in 6 months that a suspect in a high-profile case has escaped from custody in Kenya. And the UK sees record migrant arrivals in 2024. These are migrants arriving by crossing the English Channel on boats. The UK processed nearly 14,000 such arrivals in the first half of this year, but immigration by healthcare workers and students to Britain has fallen in 2024. Make in India, vocal for local, invest in India, decoupling, de-risking. 4 years ago, these slogans were everywhere. There was a movement underway aimed at China. Beijing had challenged India's sovereignty, attacked our soldiers in Galwan, and India responded through multiple moves. One of the moves was to cut dependence on Chinese goods. There was a push for self-reliance and to improve domestic manufacturing. The goal was quite simple: scale back India's addiction to Chinese imports. But 4 years on, while the border standoff is yet to be resolved, India's resolve to cut imports seems to be fizzling out. India Inc. remains reluctant to snap ties with China, and New Delhi is opening doors to Chinese investors again. They've cleared a fresh batch of investment proposals. These involve players from mainland China. One of them is Luxshare. It's a Chinese company that makes components for electronics. Luxshare is an important supplier to Apple. It assembles products like the iPhone, AirPods, and Vision Pro. Luxshare's plans for India remain unclear, but it would be safe to assume that they'll have something to do with electronics manufacturing. Now, this is one company that has got the go-ahead. The second one is Micromax, which is an Indian company. It used to be a dominant player in the Indian smartphone market. Its parent company now wants to start a joint venture. Again, a Chinese player is involved. Micromax wants to join hands with Huachin Technology. This too is an electronics manufacturer. And what's the structure of the JV? Huachin will be the minority partner. The parent company, Micromax, will have the majority shares. And what is this joint venture for? Micromax could make electronics for Huachin as a contract manufacturer. Now, this proposal has got the green light from the government of India. Others are expected to follow because India's electronics industry has more demands. It wants more clearances from the government and more visas for Chinese nationals. They say curbs on China have led to losses. How much? $15 billion in production losses, 100,000 jobs, 10 billion in export opportunities, and $2 billion in value creation. This usually means creating or offering new products which meet or surpass consumer expectations. Now, the electronics industry says that it has suffered these losses in the last 4 years, and they're blaming India's policy moves for this. Like I said, this cycle began 4 years ago in 2020 when Chinese troops challenged India at the border. India responded with economic measures. It banned more than 100 Chinese apps. They were labeled as a national security risk, the Chinese apps. India also blocked investment proposals from China and slapped tariffs on Chinese imports. Tax agencies investigated Chinese companies that were operating in India. And all these moves sent a tough message back then, that it cannot be business as usual if the Chinese military doesn't behave itself. That was India's message. But in recent months, there seems to be a shift. India has softened its policies. Chinese investments are being allowed. By the month of May this year, India had cleared more than 100 FDI proposals. FDI is foreign direct investment. 100 proposals had been cleared. Most of these were from China. New Delhi has also eased visa policies for Chinese workers. In November last year, visa restrictions on Chinese professionals were relaxed. These were for production-linked sectors. Plus, imports from China are rising. Last year, India imported Chinese goods worth more than $100 billion. So basically, instead of cutting back, India ended up importing more from China. The trade deficit has shot up. Since 2020, it has increased by 75%. The India-China trade deficit increased by 75% in the last 4 years. Today, this number is well over $85 billion. Meaning, India's imports from China are worth $85 billion more than China's imports from India. And this gap is widening. What is the reason for this? Well, India still depends on China for major industrial products. Products like electronics, machinery, cars, chemicals and textiles. These are high-value imports. And you cannot find alternatives overnight, which is a problem that the whole world is dealing with at various levels, to find alternatives to China. But the result for India is this: China's share in India's industrial imports is growing. 15 years ago, China's share was around 21%. Today, it is around 31%. So 1/3 of all industrial products that India imports, 1/3 of all products, come from China. Clearly, we've not been able to find substitutes. 4 years, and the dependence is increasing. What's worse, these trends may not reverse anytime soon. Last month, India's economic survey was tabled in Parliament. This is like the government's policy blueprint, economic policy blueprint, and it talked about Chinese investments. This report, the economic survey, suggested that India should allow more of it, more Chinese investment. And the idea was endorsed by India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Now, to be fair, New Delhi is still selective in its approach. The government rigorously vets each and every proposal. Chinese investment is allowed, but only in non-critical sectors and on a case-by-case basis. And yet, this approach could be strategically counterproductive because it weakens India's position on the border. China feels no pressure to end the standoff or to pull back its troops. It uses the trade relationship to suggest that everything is normal.
The situation on the China-India border remains generally stable, and the resolution process of the border situation should not affect the normal development of relations between the two countries. In fact, in recent years, the bilateral trade volume between China and India has continuously exceeded $100 billion, showing a trend of increasing year by year, proving the resilience and potential of trade cooperation between the two countries.
China has deployed some 200,000 troops along the border with India. Is that a sign of a stable border situation or a healthy, normal bilateral relationship? It is clear that the situation is anything but stable, but China won't admit it, let alone try to fix it, as long as Chinese goods and money keep flowing into India.
किसी भी समस्या का समाधान रणभूमि में नहीं हो सकता।
It was Prime Minister Modi's second day in Poland, as they call it, the moving day. First up was the official welcome. The Prime Minister drove down to the Chancellery, which is the Polish Prime Minister's office. There he was welcomed by his counterpart, Donald Tusk. Modi inspected a guard of honour. He was also accorded a ceremonial welcome. Take a look. Then it was time for business. India and Poland held delegation-level talks. Modi and Tusk also had a one-on-one. And what did they discuss? Trade and investments, defense and security, people-to-people ties, and science and technology. They also announced a major decision. The India-Poland relationship has been elevated to a new level, that of a strategic partnership. Which brings us to the statements. Modi and Tusk spoke to the media afterwards. All eyes were on the Indian Prime Minister. Would he talk about the war in Ukraine? Would he call for peace again? Well, he did. Modi spoke about the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. He said no problem can be solved on the battlefield.
फ्रेंड, यूक्रेन और पश्चिम एशिया में चल रहे संघर्ष हम सभी के लिए गहरी चिंता का विषय है। भारत का यह दृढ़ विश्वास है कि किसी भी समस्या का समाधान रणभूमि में नहीं हो सकता। किसी भी संकट में मासूम लोगों की जान की हानि पूरी मानवता के लिए सबसे बड़ी चुनौती बन गई है। हम शांति और स्थिरता की जल्द से जल्द बहाली के लिए डायलॉग और डिप्लोमेसी का समर्थन करते हैं।
This is in line with India's policy, no to war, mourning the loss of innocent lives and support for dialogue. The Prime Minister says he's ready to help, and this statement is quite important because it's a sneak peek of what to expect in Ukraine. A general criticism of war, but nothing specific against Russia. We'll have more clarity on all of it by tomorrow. For now, let's focus on Warsaw. The Polish Prime Minister was all praise for Indian democracy. He also hailed Prime Minister Modi's position on Ukraine.
I am very glad that the Prime Minister Modi confirmed readiness to engage personally in a peaceful, just and quick end to the war in Ukraine. We are certain that India can play a very important and positive role here. This declaration is of great significance, especially as the Prime Minister will soon visit Kyiv. We are certain that this visit will be historic as well.
Overall, it was a good visit. We may not have seen any big-ticket announcements, but that was never the point, really. This visit was about setting a foundation, about seeing how Poland and India see each other. And the result is good. The Polish Prime Minister probably summed it up best. He said India and Poland understand each other well, that there are no bilateral struggles or disputes. Now, not having differences is good, but having things in common is even better. It's more important. Poland is keen on finding that common thread. Their Prime Minister feels it could be defense. Let me explain this. Poland has grand military ambitions. They spend more than 4% of their GDP on the military. Next year, the target is 5%. It's much higher than most NATO nations. And where does India come in? You see, India has a lot of Russian and Soviet weapons. Moscow supplied 65% of India's weapons in the last 2 decades. These weapons need repair and upgrades. But Russia is already busy fighting a war, plus their companies are bogged down by sanctions. Will they be able to assist India? In case they're not, India needs other options. Enter Poland. Poland was a communist country during the Cold War. It was allied with the Soviet Union, so Poland too has Russian weapons, even fighter jets and tanks. So Polish officials say that they can help India with repairs and parts. Such a relationship would benefit both sides because India wants to sell weapons to other countries and Poland is on the market. In April, India appointed a defense attaché at the Warsaw embassy. The idea was to market Indian weapons, like the BrahMos missiles or the Tejas fighter jet. It's a great way to cement relationships, sell and buy weapons. Of course, complications remain, mainly in the form of Russia. Poland is a bitter opponent of Moscow. They don't directly share a border, but Russia has an enclave on the Baltic Sea. It's a region called Kaliningrad, and this region borders Poland. Now, reports also say that Russia has deployed nuclear weapons there in this region, almost 100 tactical nukes. So the Russia-Poland relationship is almost like a lost cause. No Polish party wants a reset with Moscow. The question is, can India sidestep these concerns? Can it really arm a Russian rival, and that to a neighboring one? It will be another test of India's strategic autonomy. The next stop for Prime Minister Modi is Ukraine. He will travel to the war-torn nation, but it's not a very easy journey to make. Ukraine is constantly under attack, so flying into the country is not an option, which is why Prime Minister Modi is taking a train. The Rail Force One, that's what the train is called, Rail Force One. It's like a mobile fortress. The journey will take around 10 hours one way, but the details are confidential. They will only be revealed after the trip ends, and Prime Minister Modi is not the first leader to take this train. In fact, it's the chosen mode of transport for world leaders to Kiev. Ukraine calls it iron diplomacy. Our next report tells you what it's like inside Rail Force One.
February 19th, 2023. It was a tense night for Ukrzaliznytsia. That's the Ukrainian railways. They were transporting a secret passenger to Kyiv from Poland. The task was challenging, but Ukraine knew they could pull it off. As the sun rose the next morning, the train had rolled into Kyiv. It was a 10-hour-long journey, but Joe Biden was finally in the war-torn nation. Getting an American president to a war zone is hard, but not impossible. And Ukraine's rail network has been a pro. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the country lost its commercial air links. The skies were too dangerous. You couldn't fly in or out. So the only option was this: trains. It became Ukraine's diplomatic passageway. It's how leaders visit the country. 200 diplomatic missions have traveled this way to Kyiv. France's Emmanuel Macron, Germany's Olaf Scholz, Canada's Justin Trudeau, the UK's Rishi Sunak, Italy's Giorgia Meloni, the EU's Ursula von der Leyen, Indonesia's Joko Widodo, they all took the train to Kyiv. But it's not just any other train, it's a fortress on wheels known as Rail Force One. The train was originally built in 2014. It was a luxury train for tourists exploring the picturesque Crimean landscape. But soon, Russia annexed Crimea. So the carriages were repurposed. It's no longer a vehicle of leisure. Instead, it's a conduit for diplomacy. Even Ukrainian President Zelensky uses it. He takes it to reach his diplomatic missions abroad. And it's the same train that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will take to Kyiv. The journey begins in Poland. It will take around 9 to 10 hours. The ride is usually overnight, but the exact schedule and route are kept confidential. It's only revealed after the journey ends. This is to minimize chances of any attacks. The train's interiors are minimal but luxurious. It's equipped with wood-paneled cabins, plush sofas, large conference tables, and wall-mounted televisions. But it's not only comfort that defines Rail Force One. The train also boasts of advanced security features like armored windows, sophisticated surveillance systems, and secure communication lines. Plus, it runs on diesel. For a country that's under attack, electric trains can be a risky choice. So, diesel engines ensure its reliability. The train also puts special touches for world leaders. For example, when Olaf Scholz took it, it was full of vases of irises. It was to appreciate Germany's supply of the Iris-T air defense system. When Finland's president took the train, the attendants wore leopard print scarves. It was because Kyiv was lobbying hard for leopard tanks back then. This makes Rail Force One more than just a form of commute. It's a hallmark of Ukraine's iron diplomacy. The tracks that Rail Force One travels on may be unpredictable, but its purpose remains steadfast, linking war-torn Ukraine to the rest of the world.
Now we turn to the US, where the presidential race is heating up. The campaigns are on in full swing. We have Donald Trump on one side, who held an outdoor rally in North Carolina. It was his first outdoor rally since the attempt on his life last month. On the other hand, you have the Democrats, who are basking in the glory of their Democratic National Convention, DNC. The DNC is supposed to be an event to nominate the presidential candidate. But Kamala Harris already secured her nomination earlier this month. So instead, this DNC is about energizing the Democratic voter base. It's a grand campaign event designed to boost support. But the Democrats are doing everything to ignore the elephant in the room. That's the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. The war is in its 10th month with no end in sight. Forget end, we don't even know if a ceasefire will take place, despite all the efforts from the current US government. This week, you saw the Secretary of State Antony Blinken make another trip to West Asia, his 9th trip in the last 10 months. He was flying all over the region, talking to the negotiators from Egypt and Qatar, trying his best to conclude a ceasefire and hostage deal. But he has left West Asia now, and a deal remains elusive.
Our message is simple, it's clear, and it's urgent. We need to get the ceasefire and hostage agreement over the finish line, and we need to do it now. Time is of the essence.
Blinken says that the ceasefire deal is urgent. It's a sentiment echoed by the current president of the US, that's Joe Biden. Biden had a call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday. He also stressed upon the urgency of getting a ceasefire deal in place. But think about it. Why has this suddenly become so urgent? The US has allowed this war to go on for 10 months. Biden could have easily pulled the plug earlier, ended American weapon shipments to Israel, forcing Netanyahu to back down, but he did not. The US allowed this war to go on for all this time, but now a ceasefire is suddenly urgent. What explains this newfound urgency? Well, maybe the view outside the DNC has something to do with it. Take a look.
Free, free, free Palestine! We won!
But in the next few weeks, we need a ceasefire in the Middle East. We need a ceasefire to stop the killing of the children. And that will get my vote.
The Democratic Party will not get our vote if the genocide in Gaza doesn't end immediately. Our vote matters, and we know that.
The Democratic Party knows it too. And it's a close election, so they need all the votes that they can get. But about 700,000 Democrats are uncommitted. 7 lakh Democrats uncommitted. They did not vote for Joe Biden during the primaries because of his failure to stop the Gaza war. That's 700,000 potential Democratic votes. They could help turn some key battleground states blue and power Kamala Harris to the White House. But right now, these people are angry. They feel that Biden has not done enough to end the war, and that anger will get redirected towards Kamala Harris, potentially scuppering her election bid. So the Democrats are doing 2 things right now. They're trying to get a ceasefire deal done, and they're simultaneously trying to stifle the pro-Palestine voices so that they don't create a ruckus. Look at what happened yesterday. About 30 Democratic Party delegates represent the uncommitted voters. They were at the DNC. and they wanted a chance to speak on stage, but their request was denied. The Democrats want to sweep these voices under the carpet to stop them from souring the mood at the convention. It's a poor way to treat your own party members, but the Democrats did not want to take any chances. However, the uncommitted delegates would not be deterred. They decided to stage a sit-in right outside the convention center. It's a message to Kamala Harris and the Democrats that the pro-Palestinian voices will not be ignored. Now combine the sit-in with the protests around the venue. It explains the urgency to get a ceasefire deal done. Biden and Blinken know that the clock is ticking. They know that they risk alienating pro-Palestinian voters and derailing Kamala Harris's campaign, which is why they're trying so hard to get a deal done right now before the final stretch of the presidential race. In a race this close, every vote matters. And without a ceasefire in place, the Democratic Party risks losing 700,000 of them.
For the Central Bureau of Investigation. Of course, the scientific evidence, the foolproof evidence of whether Sanjay Roy alone was involved or not would be the DNA test. The DNA strands received from the body have been matched with Sanjay Roy. The CBI is non-committal whether it shows a 100% match, whether it shows that anybody else was present in that room. That question is open. But it looks like things are fast moving to a situation where Sanjay Roy's presence and his role in the crime is being established beyond doubt. Now, let me reveal a little more about what the experts have told the CBI after the psychological analysis. They say that A, there's no remorse, there's no sign of remorse that Sanjay Roy shows when he's asked about the crime or his involvement in it. B, the way he's talking seems to suggest a quote-unquote animal instinct. And C, that there is a sexually deviant or perverse behavior that he's showcasing. Now, Kolkata Police's investigation also in the initial days, if you recall, Kolkata Police had taken up this case and for 4 days they had kept this case in their purview, within their investigative framework. Sanjay Roy was in their custody in no time. So Kolkata Police, when they looked at his phone, also got to know, sources tell us, that there were various pornographic clips on his phone there.
Our focus remains on the Kolkata rape and murder case. The CBI investigation is heating up and reports say they smell a cover-up, an attempt to bury or downplay this case. Let's look at the updates first. Today, the CBI submitted a status report to the Supreme Court of India. They also raised a number of points about the investigation. A couple of them stand out. Number one, the crime was committed by one man, the arrested civic volunteer. All the theories of a gang rape are false. Only one man was involved. Number two, Kolkata police first told the family that it was suicide. Later, they changed their story. They said it was a murder. Point number three, the crime scene was altered. The murder happened inside the college's seminar hall. But remember, the college was vandalized last week. Kolkata police said the crime scene was not affected, but the CBI tell a very different story. And finally, point number four, a delay in filing the FIR. A case of unnatural death was reported at around 10 a.m. 10 a.m., 10 in the morning. But the FIR was filed at 11:45 p.m., almost 14 hours later. So the Supreme Court had some tough questions for the Kolkata police.
This is something which even the criminal procedure code doesn't prescribe.
Yes, exactly.
The entire procedure
Yeah.
which has been followed by your police, police of the state, it is something which at least I have not come across.
Yes.
In 30 years of my...
I know.
Of course, the state government denies all of this. They say everything was done by the book. Right now, the CBI probe is focusing on two people. One is obviously the arrested suspect. The other is the former principal of the college. Now, he was not physically involved in the crime, but the question is, did he try to cover it up? The CBI has been questioning him for 7 consecutive days. He was called in today as well. Each interrogation has lasted more than 12 hours, so the CBI could be onto something. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court issued some orders today. It asked the Kolkata police to show restraint, to not use violence on peaceful protesters. It also asked the striking doctors to return to work, and looks like this worked, because doctors at AIIMS had been striking for 11 days, but today they called it off. So people are placing their trust on the Supreme Court of India. Just one problem though, the court can only do so much. Even laws can only help so much. What we need is social change. Unfortunately, we are not seeing that. Look at the Google search trends over the last few days. Look at the trending searches. Rape video of the victim. Kolkata victim's porn. That is what people are searching for. Now, the victim's name had been leaked on social media. Her picture was also shared widely. So this is what perverts did. Search for the video of her rape. It tells you why India reports one rape case every 16 minutes. Because of this disgusting attitude. And it's not a one-off. We saw a similar trend in 2019. A veterinary doctor was raped and killed in Hyderabad. The same thing happened. People started searching for the video. What does this trend tell you? That rape has been normalized. It's not a crime for these perverts. It's just something to Google, like a source of entertainment or pleasure. Unless such attitudes change, women will not be safe. Just think about it. We're talking about tackling rape. But there are people who don't even think it's a crime. Some of them blame women for it, for the clothes they wear or the so-called signals that they send. So forget tackling if you can't even accept it's wrong. The question then is, what is the solution? And the answer, we say, is education. And I don't mean what you learn in class, I mean social education. Teach our society what is right and wrong. Don't tell girls to stay home at night. Tell boys to respect women. At First Post, we are trying to do our bit, bringing you special stories on women's safety, on why safety is a human right at home, at work, on public transport, basically everywhere. This is not negotiable anymore. It's an absolute necessity. Let me tell you about another disturbing case. It's from the Malayalam film industry, from the southern Indian state of Kerala. It is known for progressive cinema, for movies on women empowerment. But what about the women in the industry? How empowered are they? They face discrimination, they lack basic facilities, and they face sexual assault at work. Says who? A judicial committee report. Let me give you the background first. This story begins in 2017 when a leading actress was kidnapped. 5 men abducted her, assaulted her in a moving car, and filmed the assault. Later, a prominent male actor was named in this case. Apparently, he had planned all of this to settle scores with her. He wanted to use this assault video to blackmail her later. The incident led to massive outrage across Kerala, so the state government formed a committee, a 3-member committee led by a retired Kerala High Court judge. Her name is Justice K. Hema. This committee looked into the Malayalam film industry, into issues of sexual harassment and gender bias. And in 2019, they submitted a report. It was called the Hema Committee Report. 295 pages long, submitted in 2019. But the state government kept sitting on it. The matter reached courts. Petitions were filed for the report to be released, and now finally in 2024, a redacted version of the report is out. And what it says is extremely disturbing, though not surprising. Number one, there's a culture of sexual harassment in the film industry. Powerful men demand sexual favors in exchange of roles in movies. If you resist, you're sidelined. And the harassment is continuous. There are late-night knocks on the door, vulgar comments, sometimes drunk male co-stars force themselves into the women's room. Point number 2. Sexual harassment is hardly reported because there's a fear of retribution. Women who report cases face harassment and a backlash, including from the fan clubs of the accused men. Point number 3, there's a powerful mafia of male actors. They call the shots, they decide the roles, and if you displease them, you risk a ban. In fact, let me quote from the report. It says, no man or woman dare to utter any word which may offend anyone belonging to the power group, because such a person will be wiped off the industry by the powerful lobby. Point number 4, the industry is male-dominated. I'm sure it's not news to anyone. It is male-dominated, but this case is so bad that women do not have basic facilities. They don't have separate toilets or changing rooms. Sometimes they have to relieve themselves in open spaces. In fact, this report reveals 17 forms of exploitation in all. Imagine that. These are so-called stars from one of the biggest film industries in the country, yet women don't have basic facilities. There's rampant sextortion. And all of this is an open fact. Apparently everyone knows about it, but no one complains, allowing this cycle of misogyny to continue. It appears so stark because it involves men who are seen as icons and heroes. But the fact is, this practice is not limited to Kerala or the film industry. It's a reflection of the world we live in. And I'm not exaggerating. Let me show you another report. It says that detailed guides to sextortion are available online. Guides to sextortion on TikTok and YouTube. These are written manuals, video guides and step-by-step tutorials. They teach how to sexually exploit teenagers. And it's all very detailed. It starts with creating fake accounts, obtaining their contacts, targeting the victims and blackmailing them for money. All of this is available on the web for anyone to see. And this is the reality of being a woman in today's world, anywhere in the world. The spaces we occupy are dangerous. Whether we are at work or at home or online, women still whisper warnings to each other about certain colleagues or bosses. They still weigh the risks of speaking up. They're still scared about being blacklisted. They fear not just the violence, but also the repercussions. It's easy for a society to claim progress when the headlines move on. The truth is, news cycles change, but the reality often doesn't. We still find ourselves in a world where women live in fear. And it takes an emotional toll, the anxiety, the stress, the hypervigilance. It wears women down every day to know that your safety is not guaranteed and that you will be blamed if you're attacked. It's a heavy burden to carry. So we're asking for real change. And that requires dismantling systems. Mere lip service won't do. Laws need to change. Workplaces need to be equal. Homes need to be safe. And social media needs guardrails. And all of this requires listening to women, believing in them, and taking action to ensure their safety. That day, unfortunately, hasn't come yet. But until it does, we must keep fighting for it. There's a churn in the Indian auto market. For months, it's been flying high, record sales, rising profits, and happy dealers. But looks like someone hit the brakes. Look at the data from the month of July. Car sales fell 2.5% compared to last year, the first drop in more than 2 years. Maruti Suzuki dropped 3.6%, Hyundai dropped 3%, and Tata fell almost 6%. The question is why? What happened to the momentum? Well, experts point to 2 reasons. Number one, the general elections. India voted from mid-April to June, and during this time, the finance rules are very tight. You can't keep or transport too much cash. As a result, auto sales plunged. And reason number 2, the intense heat wave. Reports say footfall at dealerships was down by 15%. Why? Because it was too hot. Now, both these reasons led to a drop in sales. It's a problem for car makers, but it's an even bigger problem for dealers. The dealers say we have too much stock to sell. Let me first introduce the key players here. One is FADA, the Federation of Automobile Dealers Association. They represent 15,000 dealers. The other is SIAM, Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers. Basically, you have the producers and the dealers. The dealers say they have too much stock. How many cars are we talking about here? More than 730,000, 730,000 cars lying in stock. That's inventory for more than 2 months. But the car makers say that that's not the case. They claim the stock is half of that, just about 400,000. Do you see the discrepancy here? Maybe it's a computing mistake, maybe it's the result of faulty methodology, but either way, it is a problem. Dealers are not able to sell this much stock. They say producers are dumping cars on them. In fact, FADA has written twice to car makers, both times with the same demand: stop pushing inventory on us. So why are car makers not listening? Dealers say because of over-ambition, every producer is eager to capture more market share. As a result, they are pushing more cars to dealers. The problem may be specific to India, but the larger trend is global. China's car sales also fell in July, that too by almost 10%. Same in the United States. Car sales plunged 2.8% rather in July. Again, the question is why? You see, 2023 was an aberration for the auto market. We had a lot of pent-up demand from the pandemic, so the car makers had a great time. Compared to 2023, this year was always going to be a dampener. Another reason is the electric pivot. Car makers have set an ambitious target for 2030. They want 30% of their sales to be EVs, electric vehicles. So customers may hold back on purchases. They may want to see this EV revolution unfold. But either way, India's auto market needs a recalibration. You see, China too has surplus stock. But they have a convenient outlet: exports. If people aren't buying at home, they can just export. Just look at the last quarter. China exported almost 400,000 cars. What about India? Around 180,000. That was our export figure, which creates added pressure on the domestic market. Of course, there is some respite around the corner. India's festival season starts next month. It lasts until Diwali in November. Indians tend to buy a lot of cars during this time. And that may ease the pressure a bit. But before we end, let me say this. If you're looking to buy a car, now is a good time. Dealers have too much stock, which means that you should get good discounts. Plus, the waiting time should be shorter. After all, there are 700,000 cars lying in inventory. If your dealer still plays hard, just show them this report. Our next story is about Starbucks. The company has selected its next CEO. His name is Brian Niccol. The 50-year-old will take charge on September 9th. But there's a catch. Niccol is based out of California in the coastal city of Newport Beach. He has a nice house amid the sun and surf. But Starbucks is headquartered in Seattle, far up the US West Coast in the cloudy Pacific Northwest. Now, would you want to trade sunshine and warmth for overcast and bleak? Probably not. And it seems Niccol did not want that either. So Starbucks made him an offer he could not refuse. Starting next month, Niccol will be a hybrid CEO living in California, but flying to Seattle at least thrice a week on the company's private jet, of course. It's been called a super commute. The term cheerfully masks the reality, which is that Starbucks is willing to torch the environment just to accommodate their new CEO. Here's our report.
Like most companies these days, Starbucks wants to be seen as environmentally conscious. It's been working on this image for a while now. In 2018, it said it would stop giving out single-use plastic straws. The deadline was 2020. Last November, the company's board created a new committee, an Environmental Partner and Community Impact Board Committee. And guess who might be on this board? The new Starbucks CEO, Brian Niccol, the man who just worked out an amazing deal. When he takes charge, Starbucks will take care of Niccol's super commute. The company jet will take him from Newport Beach, California to Seattle and back, at least thrice a week. Yes, Niccol will not be required to relocate. Instead, he can continue to live in sunny California and travel 1,600 kilometers one way to work via private jet. Earlier this year, Starbucks started accepting reusable cups, At the time, they said, "We know our customers are passionate about the planet, and now they can join us in our efforts to give more than we take." So this is how Starbucks plans to give more than they take? By flying their new CEO all over the American West Coast? It's the pinnacle of corporate climate hypocrisy, with whipped cream on top. Brian Niccol is the outgoing CEO of Chipotle. It's a fast food chain serving Mexican food. Niccol turned their fortunes around after taking charge in 2018. Chipotle stocks rose by 773% during his time there. So, Niccol has a proven track record. And stock prices beat environmental concerns every single time. Starbucks isn't alone when it comes to this. Greenwashing is a common phenomenon. Companies pretend to be more climate friendly than they really are, to appeal to environmentally conscious customers. But they'll keep polluting the environment, while coming up with fun new activities for the rest of us. It's a customer's job to use reusable straws, to recycle plastic bottles, to bring cloth bags to the grocery store. But companies and their top bosses are above all this. Look at this report from last year. It says that the richest 1% of society emits as much as the poorest 66%. The top 1% of the human race pollutes as much as the poorest 2/3. Luxury yachts, fancy cars, and of course, private jets. All of these things hurt the environment. And they are only used by the privileged few. The super CEOs on their super commutes. And what about the rest of us? Well, we're stuck cleaning up their mess, one reusable straw at a time.
Now, on a lighter note, let's talk about toxic people. Okay, maybe it's not all that lighter note, but let me ask you this. Do you know someone whom you would call toxic? This is a loaded question. So let me rephrase. Does navigating a relationship, professional or personal, feel like you're walking across a minefield? If yes, this story is for you, because that toxic relationship is reducing your lifespan. And we aren't saying this. Maria is. Maria Branias. She was the world's oldest person. Earlier this year, she celebrated her 117th birthday, and this week she died in her sleep. She had no major health issues. She lived a long, happy life, long enough to become a super centenarian, or someone who is 110 years old or more. She struck 117 years. It does sound like a superhuman quality. But how did she get there? Well, she attributed her longevity to a number of things, including luck, good genes, and staying away from toxic people. Now, the first two things, luck and good genes, are not within our control. So I guess Branias did get lucky that way. But the third bit, staying away from toxicity, that is something all of us can work on. And it would be in our favor, not because that's the Gen Z mantra and you do not want to get on their wrong side, but because plenty of research agrees with this, and we'll tell you why. But first, let's answer a basic question. Who are toxic people? For starters, toxic is a potent word. It literally means the ability to cause harm, and anyone can do that. We can all be spiteful, selfish, or lacking in empathy at some point in time, so the term is completely subjective. But generally speaking, toxic relationships are draining, and they harm your mental health. No shocker there. But bad relationships are bad for our physical health as well, not just our mental health, the physical health too. They increase our risk of depression, high blood pressure, and obesity. And what about healthy relationships? Well, they have the very opposite effect. More than wealth, IQ, or social class, positive relationships make for a happy life. They ensure our good health. They boost our immune system. They protect us against stress, depression, decline in memory and language, heart disease, and diabetes. In short, they help us live longer. But we don't really need studies to tell us this, do we? We know that toxic relationships are bad for us. We don't actively seek them out, yet every one of us has dealt with someone who we think of as toxic, be it at home or at work. It could be a friend, a partner, a parent, a boss. It could be anyone, really. So how can we avoid toxic people? Well, this too is a tricky question because it is nearly impossible to do so. So let's rephrase this question too. How can we deal with toxic people? What tools do we have at our disposal? Research suggests a three-step approach. The first step is to recognize the problem. And this may sound like a no-brainer, but this is usually the toughest bit. Noticing the red flags, the lack of respect, the manipulation, the abuse, it is not easy. But acknowledging a toxic relationship marks the beginning of its end. As a second step, set healthier boundaries. If need be, walk away and focus on what is good for you. Which brings us to the third step, nurturing positive relationships. After all, isn't that the end goal? Avoiding toxic relationships so we can make space for healthier ones and invest in them. And this process is not always easy, but it pays big dividends of not just a happy, healthy life, but clearly a longer one too. There's a new YouTuber in town. His name is Cristiano Ronaldo. And no, it is not a mistake. We are talking about that Ronaldo. In just over 24 hours, he's got 22 million subscribers. Let me repeat that. 22 million subscribers in 24 hours. I guess that settles the debate. What we need at first post is a footballer, someone with six-pack abs and 800 career goals. If you're one of them, drop us a reply. I am kidding, of course. The slow decline of the Indian auto market is way more exciting than Cristiano Ronaldo. I mean, it's a no-brainer. You have two heads of state discussing climate change, and you have close access to Ronaldo's training videos. Of course, you'll pick the first one. Internet is having a lot of fun with Ronaldo's record-breaking YouTube debut. Although I guess some YouTube channels will be sad. Mr. Beast, for one, has a lot to worry about. We aren't, though.
Local reports here in the Kolkata media which suggests that before the crime was committed on the morning and evening of 8th of August, Sanjay Roy visited the red light area, the Sonagachi area as well. CBI is not corroborating this, but there are local media reports based on conversations with various sources in that area which suggests that Sanjay Roy did go to the red light area and another aide of his accompanied. So together, all this information seems to suggest that he was a sex maniac, and it also suggests that the victim perhaps fell prey to his sexually pervasive, perverse behavior. And what is it that Sanjay Roy knows? He claims that what he's saying is the truth. However, CBI wants to also put him through a polygraph test, a lie detector test. It has not happened yet, even though the preliminary permission came 2 days ago, because no lawyer wants to represent him. A legal aid counsel has been assigned to him, but CBI is worried, it is concerned that given the allegations and given the public mood here in Kolkata, if Sanjay Roy is taken to a public place like the Sialda court for the polygraph test procedure, for the polygraph test hearing, there could be a threat to his life.
Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. A Canadian firm discovers the world's second largest diamond in Botswana. Bangladesh floods leave nearly 3 million people stranded. And a robot chef shows off its crepe skills at a conference in Beijing. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1910, Japan annexed Korea. This was after years of intimidation and war. To establish its control, Japan tried to destroy Korean culture. It also forced thousands of Korean women to become sex slaves. Korea remained under Japanese control until 1945. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
Therefore, it is likely that the Central Bureau of Investigation could move the Kolkata High Court seeking permission for a virtual hearing. This hearing will perhaps lead to Sanjay Roy giving his consent for the polygraph test. The polygraph test